Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 14th episode of By the Drip. This podcast is about coffee, entrepreneurship, and the people we meet through the amazing story of coffee. I'm your host, David Crosby, founder and CEO of Rosso Coffee Roasters. In this episode, I have a great chat with Chef Mike Pigot. He shares with us his introduction to the fine dining world and how that primed his curiosity and creativity through cooking. This has led to Chef Pigot opening multiple passion-driven restaurants in Calgary and across Canada. We also get into a fun discussion on how he ended up on a reality TV cooking show. It was a great conversation with Chef Pigot, and I hope you enjoy it too. Chef Pigot, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dave.
How's the new restaurant?
It's been crazy. Such a journey and crazy reception to start off the first few weeks, which I'm super stoked about, but definitely a lot of hard work and glad to see the reception come through.
Nice. Okay, we'll get to Pat and Betty's. Let's go back in time to the start of when you wanted to become a chef. Run me through how you got into this crazy world.
Oh, that's a vintage question. I think for me, I started going to the restaurant industry when I was pretty young. Definitely didn't think I was going to be a chef. That's for sure. It was like, you're taking a job to have a job. I remember I applied a job for Subway. I was like, I'm going to be a sandwich artist. That's the goal. Didn't get hired. Interviewed twice. Only job I've ever applied for. Didn't get hired from. Started kind of open a door from there. A friend of mine was working at a little fine dining restaurant in my hometown. I grew up in Abbotsford, BC. He was going away for school to travel in the Netherlands. And he's like, hey, I'm working as a host doorman for this little fine dining spot. And he's like, are you interested in taking that job? And I was like, yeah, for sure. So went and had an interview, kind of interesting experience, and started that. They're like, you need to get a suit. They gave me some white gloves and they're like, come train on this day. So
wow, real fine dining.
Yeah, real fine dining. Went and bought a suit with my dad, got it all fitted, and then came in and started my kind of thing there. And that was the kind of first introduction into the restaurant world. Didn't know at the time, but the chef I worked for was a CCC chef. So certified chef de cuisine, lots of education behind him. Just having that experience of working for someone like that and seeing all the nitty gritty of the restaurant industry at a little bit more elevated level. That's kind of where the interest and the fascination definitely started for curiosity.
Do you start going into back of house and that's what interests you is the cuisine? What got you? I always think I'm a terrible chef, and how does someone go down this road?
For me, it was really just kind of a starting point of just seeing it. Really fascinated with food. My mom and my grandfather were all in the food industry. My uncle as well. And my mom's side of the family, they all worked with Save-On, Overweighty, that whole piece. So always kind of had interesting ingredients in the house, or my uncle was a purchaser. So you'd get I remember seeing grapples for the first time as a kid in a plastic container with 4 of them. And I was like, what is this? So crazy. But lots of interesting food facts and just interesting stuff that kind of came through that upbringing, but never really thought of it as a career in a restaurant or being a chef. And my mom was a phenomenal home cook. My grandparents were phenomenal home cooks as well, my grandma and grandpa. And so just seeing that and always kind of being fascinated with it, but it wasn't until I saw the artistic side where it kind of tied both together. Originally my whole kind of life path was being an artist. I wanted to be a photographer or a drawer or a painter and work in that in a bunch of different medias. And that was really my goal and focus in high school. And the restaurant was just a job that I had and enjoyed, and definitely interesting characters that you meet in all those sort of hospitality and service driven worlds. So I was just kind of always driven, attracted to that. And that was really the big piece of kind of staying on when I went through kind of everything from there. So education happened, but still kind of worked as a chef, moved into a sous chef role and an acting chef role for some corporate restaurants when I was still quite young in my early 20s. It's kind of progressed from there in the food world, and realized on both sides, being an artist and being a chef, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of putting your face out there, trying stuff and kind of seeing where it lands. And I just remember sitting with some profs when I was out here. I moved to Calgary to go to ACAD at the time, University of the Arts now. I was super fascinated with that. But talking to one of my profs there, and her husband's friend was a chef at the Royal York in Toronto. And they're just Mike, art's the career you always work for. And then there's this piece here where you go into hospitality and it's that you're always on call, you're always on demand. So it's similar and different at the same time. And for me, I was well, I'm in my education right now. I don't really want to be a teacher. That's really seemed the path of what education looked like for being an artist at that point. And so I was took the leap and started doing restaurants full time at that point when I was about 23, 24.
And then you were a line chef and then working your way up?
Yeah. So I worked at a number of different, I worked for the Earls, Milestones, Moxies, all those things. And I did that for a number of years and got a ton of experience. I worked as a chef or a sous chef at pretty much all those properties. Got to see kind of the whole infrastructure of behind the scenes and what it takes to run a really successful restaurant from a financial standpoint and just unified execution of being so consistent. And from there, that's kind of where it kind of all grew.
And so under your name, you got Pat and Betty's, you got Pigot Burgers, which is in 3 cities?
Yeah, 3 cities right now.
Craft beer market, you got home and away, you're working on all these things. How do you balance the time, the menus, the costing, the people?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work to balance it, a lot to juggle. I'm super fortunate with my client work and the pieces that I do there. So Burger Club was definitely a big collaboration point of last year of kind of my first jump into putting my name behind something. And originally I was there's no way I want to name it after myself. And my partners in there were put it out there, let's see what happened. And the reception was
phenomenal.
And I didn't really expect that. And seeing it in Calgary market, it was awesome. And so much love for the city to see that kind of progression and piece come out right away of we're in the pandemic, everyone's doing takeout. What do you do that's different and fun and can bring people back together? And just having that connection point was awesome. And seeing that result be so successful in the city, we're well, let's try it somewhere else. So we launched Toronto pretty soon after that. When I launched in Toronto, it was the full lockdown. There was no retail, anything out there. So it was pretty crazy experience to go to a city, a huge city like that and see no one out ever for the week we launched, and got that all launched and great reception there too. Sold it our first day, partnered with a chef out there, the Heartbreak Chef, Jerome Robinson, really incredible dude that does some really cool, fun, takeout, fast casual stuff out there, from fried chicken to burgers to mac and cheese and all that. So collaborated with him on that project and then took that to Vancouver in the May right after that and opened up collaborating with Alex Chen. So Boulevard Restaurants, was represented Bocuse d'Ivoire a number of years ago as well, and probably one of the best chefs in Canada. So having him do a burger for us was pretty exciting and a fun collaboration as well to introduce that to the city, and a very welcomed response. And that's kind of stayed true to what they are since we started.
So the new restaurant, Pat and Betty, maybe give our listeners a pitch on why they should go there, the history behind it. It's, the hottest new restaurant in Calgary.
Pat and Betty. So first and foremost, it's kind of an homage to our mothers, my business partner, James, and myself. My mom's Pat, his mom's Betty, and wanted to kind of pay into that of this European kind of heritage, but also with our upbringing in Canada and having that as well. So kind of Quebecois French meets modern New York style Italian, tied in with some influences from Europe and that sort of piece as well. So we're calling it a European dinette, and that's kind of the pitch of the food program, but really taking homage to that Acadian and Canadian history for both of us. So just serving really decadent, delicious things and being unapologetically indulgent with what we do. I think there's butter in every single menu item there. We don't shy away from gluten and shellfish and all things decadent and delicious. So that's really our approach to the food in a really intimate, beautiful room that I think is really fascinating for what the city hasn't really seen yet, from the art that we've established into it to the bathrooms to our private dining room to everything. There's lots of really unique pieces, and having that bar and kitchen as a real big showpiece to what people are coming and dining for.
So maybe explain to listeners what opening a restaurant through COVID-19's like. How is a head chef dealing with all, and a partner, we got closures, capacity limits. Obviously, those haven't quite hit you yet, but how did you navigate through?
Well, fingers crossed that doesn't hit again, but we're hoping for the best. For us, really, it was the navigation of supply chain and getting the right people to do the right jobs and making sure that product arrives. And we're going through that process. Permitting is obviously a huge challenge as well. So going into a heritage building and turning it from a place that had nothing established really in it besides some washrooms and some plumbing to taking it into a place that's a full service restaurant and running our gas lines and getting all those sort of permit stuff done definitely presented a challenge. It was almost a full year process just to do that.
It took a full year?
Almost. We started in March last year, kind of our planning phase. We had kind of our whole design and everything done in May, and then didn't end up getting our permits and construction stuff kind of rolling until almost September. So it's definitely a big undertaking for that. And then fortunate with the construction piece and not too many hiccups with supply chain, but definitely delayed us a little longer than we were hoping. But now we're in a great spot and super fortunate to be open. Kind of had finished construction around mid to late December. Had to tie up some loose ends and make sure we're all set, ready to go, and then rolled into it. But definitely a lot more challenging than I was expecting it to be, but super rewarding to see it all come together now.
So if you had a piece of advice for a chef who's, working at maybe an Earls or Milestones and they want it, in 5-10 years, they want to open a restaurant, what kind of a piece of advice could you give them?
it's a tough one. The advice I got from all my friends before I did it was like, don't do it. Which I definitely don't. I wouldn't say no to that. I think it's a great opportunity, and you're definitely instilling culture into a city and doing something a little bit different. So I would definitely recommend it, but do it on your terms and making sure you're smart with how you execute and being very realistic. Like, it is super expensive. It takes a lot longer than most people expect it to. So having a little bit of a nest egg and making sure that you're really ready to dive in for your first one makes life a little less stressful, and knowing that you can put your time in and make sure that it's done right.
So you've been living at the restaurant. You told me you got a little injury because you've been there so much.
Yeah. Basically, I've been there every day since we've opened, just to making sure that we're the vision's being executed and getting us to a thing. We have an amazing team behind us, really great sous chefs that we brought on board, and really great cooks and front of house team that all are super passionate about the brand and what we're trying to bring to life, which is like just a blessing in and of itself. But yeah, the hours definitely add up quick. Did a little deal on my Achilles, so I'm just kind of taking it easy for a couple of days and then getting back into it tomorrow.
Okay, we got some questions about food trends. What food trends do you wish would just disappear that are either going on currently or have been in the past couple of years?
I don't necessarily know if I wish anything would disappear, to be completely honest. I think it's been a more realistic reality of just seeing what works and what doesn't work now. Like when you're saying, hey, you can go out or you can't go out and you're going to go dine, like takeout's a real thing, but also like they're the opposite world too, of like, you don't have to have takeout. Like it's okay not to do takeout as a restaurant and like execute your vision and do it. You see it in Toronto, you see it in Vancouver, people that are like, we're just not serving food for the next bit. It's stressful and we're going to put it onto the hold. But I think that's been an interesting one to see, of like people just holding their guns of what they do. But for me, I think the world of kale is slowly dissipating, which is okay for all of us. It has a time and a place, but that's one for me for sure. But I think just people's interest in food now, especially after the pandemic, is so much greater. Like I talk to people all the time that like nerd out on like fermentation, and like the home cook now like has this like palate and education they never had before. Cause it's like, what do you do when you can sit in front of your computer and like research stuff? Or like, hey, I made this pie once and now I'm going to make it every week for 52 weeks because I'm at home all the time. So I think like that like sort of passion piece of the home cook has been really fascinating to see with like a trend. Definitely adds to like when I talk to a guest in the restaurant, they're like so much more keen on curious of like, how do you do this or how do you get that result? And I really love seeing that. I think that's one that's fascinating for me.
How do you deal with either feedback, or everyone's kind of a home chef, especially now through COVID? How do you, I guess, broach those Google reviews or someone, saying like, oh, I used to do it a different way, or how do you deal with that kind of stuff?
I think the review world in general is challenging. Fortunate to have some really great reviews, and I love that people offer feedback in the first and foremost. But I think the biggest one being, on a negative standpoint, is like just knowing what you are as a restaurant or an institution. So someone can say like, I didn't like this, didn't cater to this. But if you're like, okay, well, that's not the concept that we're offering, that's okay. Like if you're like, hey, yeah, we're like Pat and Betty is a great example. We're unapologetically indulgent with what we do. Everything has butter. This is the approach. So if you come in with a dairy allergy, unfortunately, like we're just not offering that. We can, if someone requests in advance, sends us an email, says, hey, we'd love to come in. We're lactose intolerant. There is options for them, of course. But if they say, yeah, I'm lactose intolerant, I'd like this, then yeah, I have an option for you, but it's planned. It's rather than being like, come in and just expect that like anyone's going to make anything for you. And so I think it's just like setting an expectation and knowing who you are makes that review world way less intrusive into your life and weighs a little bit less on you. But also like, don't let one bad review kick you in the teeth, like, or change your business. Like stay true to what you're doing. And if you're confident in that, then that's going to execute really well. Of course, you see every review is negative, then like that probably need to change something. So if it's one in every 25 that say this, then take that with a grain of salt and grow where you need to. But I think knowing that and holding true to what you're trying to execute is a huge part of opening a restaurant, opening a business, is being like, this is our vision. This is what we want. This is the execution point. And if you can own that, then you're going to be way happier and it's going to be way less intrusive on your life.
How do you design a menu? What goes into that?
I think it all comes to balance and just like the approach. So you can have a place that's very multicultural in how they're cooking. I look at places like big chain restaurants that are like very much like they offer something to everyone. And it's like when you have a 400 seat room can offer a very broad thing. Whereas you have a 70 seat room, maybe it's more niche and ties to one kind of trend. But for me, designing a menu, it's really looking at what do the people want that are coming into the space. If you're a sports bar, you're going to bring in an amazing take on wings, nachos, burgers, that approach. If you're going into like a beer hall, more widespread like food climate, you're going to be like a little bit more elevated in your approach, but still offering all the hits, but also having kind of something for everyone, from like vegan options to different bowls, salads, some fun plays on entrees, pizza, like all those pieces. And if you take it into like a more of a fine dining realm, then you're staying true to like what you're trying to execute, whether it's French, Italian, those sort of pieces, and bringing it into a different standpoint.
What do you personally enjoy cooking the most?
For me, honestly, I think I just like enjoy making things that are simple and delicious. So it doesn't really necessarily mean like one ingredient. I love cooking seafood. Like that's something I've growing up on the West Coast and having family on the Vancouver Island. It's always been something that's been around me. So like I've always been passionate about seafood and fascinated with that and having super fresh seafood. So that's something that I like to cook at home and going that approach with, and just things that are comfortable, whether it's like a nice pasta, ties into what I'm doing elsewhere as well. So having all those things come together. Talk
to us a little bit about your pasta program. You got a subscription, you got, the takeout joint.
Yeah. So Pasta Lamano has been a fun adventure. Lamano ourselves. I partnered with my friend Aaron. He started the business kind of as a program during COVID of like, what do we do to pivot what he was working on? We've kind of grown it now to the subscription-based service that now is in Calgary, Edmonton. We do a monthly collaboration with the chef in a city and offer that to all of our subscribers. We also have a little pasta shop, so you can order retail or come pick up retail in there, or order online as well for pickup or delivery. And we have a little spot in First Street Market as well as a kind of quick service pasta joint that we love and people have been really receptive to.
How hard is it to make pasta?
It's a lot of trial and error, a lot of ratios of what works well in our extruder, what works well for a hand rolled dough, finding that thing that's going to hold up for our consumers too if you don't eat it right away. And so lots of trial and error, lots of experimenting, but also really creative for our team and all of us to be able to execute and bring in great new shapes and forms and working through that as well, which is always fun for everyone involved.
Yeah, the pasta there is amazing. The sandwiches are amazing too. They've been, we stopped there a little too often. Okay. What was the TV show you were on?
Guys Grocery Games.
What? How did you get linked up with this? What is the backstory? Tell us about how did you get on the TV show?
Super crazy experience, to be honest with you. I remember I'm at Home and Away at this time. This was about, I guess it would have been like 2018-ish, around there. And I get a phone call at the restaurant one day and they're like, hey, like we're looking at your Instagram, love to look at the food and like the like bar approach that you're doing of just like different bar food and like creative wings. And I was like, oh, cool. Like
this is a producer who's phoning you?
Yeah, just phoning and so chatting. She's like, oh, I'd love to talk to the chef. And I'm like, oh, that's me. So we just started talking through things at the time. She's like, I'm actually calling about a TV show. I'm based in LA. I work for a casting company. We just kind of started the conversation there. I wasn't really sure what show it was or what we were applying for. And just kind of went through that whole piece of interviewing for it, which is a very fascinating and long process.
Tell us the whole process.
Like we start off with like just like an interview over the phone, then we go to a couple different casting phone call or casting like video interviews online and went through that piece, and then they go to their selection process from there. So fortunate enough that I got selected, which is awesome, and went down to their studio in just outside of San Francisco and filmed. And crazy to do it so far in advance. Like we filmed it basically a year before it was released, and was released in the States before Canada as well. But yeah, it's a really fascinating, cool program to be a part of, and all the moving parts of live television is
so if
crazy.
Someone hasn't seen it, maybe explain the episode and what's going on.
Yeah, so the episode I was on was called Carnival Games, so carnival themed food. So it was pretty fun and exciting in that. You start out with 4 chefs and went down to the final 2, going through 3 rounds, and then 1 grocery champion after that. So yeah, super, super fun experience. Very, very grateful to have that under my belt.
And you just had your cart and you were whipping around, like grabbing products in real time?
Yeah, so different real time, every round's timed, and it's all based on different themes of each one. So the first one was like best fried food, and then the next one was like best thing on a stick, and the last one was like best thing between 2 buns. They put restrictions on it. You play a bunch of games. Super fun experience.
What is cooking on a reality TV show like? Is it any different than just in the kitchen?
Stressful. Not that working in a restaurant is not stressful, but being under the clock and coming up with everything and running around a grocery store trying to figure it out is definitely puts the pressure on.
Yeah.
But yeah, super fun experience, and met some amazing people. Their whole team that was on the show is awesome to work with, and just a really fun process. But going onto it and being like, oh, this is actually like, it's real. Like, it's like, you have 20 minutes to do something. So putting that under your belt and seeing that you can do it and go through it was a super wild experience.
Would you do a Top Chef or any of those, or is that too much of a commitment and you're out for 8 weeks or 12 weeks? Or
for me, I'm open to anything, to be honest with you. I think it's a fun experience to do, and definitely anything you can do to build your brand and your personal program. Definitely love to do more for sure. It's the right opportunity, the right time frame. And if it works out, then I definitely love that. So you won Best of Calgary Best Chef in 2020. It's quite the honor. What does that mean to you? For me, it was I was like super overwhelming, to be honest with you. When I found out, I was quite shocked, and I just very flattering for coming to a city. I've been here for almost 15 years now, which is also just like mind-boggling to think about, or 14 years now. Coming to a city and just like starting a career and starting to do what you like are really passionate about, and seeing that kind of grow and evolve, and then like to have that like little bit of validation 12, 13 years later is super grateful for the city and like how I've kind of been embraced in what I've been doing here. And I love that about Calgary. It's like the biggest small town, and I think people here really embrace people that are doing cool stuff and bringing more to the city, and in general just being nice to one another. So I love that as a whole.
By the Drip is sponsored by Rosso Coffee Roasters. You can check out the wide selection of coffees on the website, rossocoffeeroasters.com. You can save 20% off your first order by using the promo code BYTHEDRIP. This week, I'm loving an amazing coffee from Colombia from a farm called Finca Hawaii. The mocha varietal is incredibly small, yet packs a ton of flavor of passion fruit, mango, and pineapple. Enjoy sipping on some Rosso coffee while listening to my chat with Chef Pigot. For home chefs, what kind of tips or tricks or equipment that can really help like improve their cooking experience or their knowledge at home?
I think at home, like having a really good pot and pan set.
Okay.
Having a really good chef's knife.
So how do we know like the real deal versus...
I think from a pot and pan standpoint, I would say like something that's like not your flimsy aluminum pan, like get something that's like stainless steel, get something that's a little bit nicer. It can be very simple. There's obviously such a broad spectrum of kitchen equipment that you can buy, but just spending a little bit more and making sure you're getting something that's a little bit more stable. They should last you a lifetime at home, to be honest. Like you'll have restaurants that use the same frying pan for 5-6 years, and they're being used dozens and dozens and dozens of time a day over each service, and they last. So buying something that's going to do the same for you at home and have forever. Like I have pieces from my grandparents that are like still alive and well. So I think that is a big one. The other one being buying like the right knife for you, but a knife that's sharp and you can use at home. Somewhere like Knifeware here does an amazing job with stuff and kind of caters to everyone, whether it's someone a little bit more experienced and you buy something that's carbon and a little less forgiving for the home cook. But if you know what you're doing, it's going to last you forever too. You keep it sharp and looked after, or you buy something that's more that stainless steel or machine built approach that's still going to last you forever, hold its edge and be really sharp in that realm.
You're supposed to hand wash these, or you put them in the
hand wash always. No dishwashing of the knife ever.
What about a cast iron pan?
No dishwashing, just hand wash.
Hand wash with soap or no soap?
That's like a tough debate. I think if you use soap, it's being quick with it and just not letting it soak in there. But obviously just like scrubbing it out all the time and not letting that water sit on it. Wet, dry right away. Don't let it soak in your sink. It's going to last you forever.
So if I soak it, or I'm removing like flavor from it, or I'm ruining the pot?
Ruining the pot, it can rust. It's susceptible for that. So I just never soak it. Yeah.
And how about tips on just like creating better food or my knowledge base? Other than watching you on TV.
I think the big one is just seasoning. People are like shy away from salt. You go to a restaurant and literally every single component has been salted and seasoned in some way. So you're going home, you're just steaming broccoli every night and putting a little bit of salt in your chicken. Like season it well, maybe marinate it before, cook it the next day, let all that flavor soak into it, and then maybe finish with a little bit of Maldon salt. Something to bring out that kind of characteristic on it that you have a little bit more flavor forward.
So how do you know you've put like enough salt or seasoning? I don't even know how to cook an egg.
This is a very scientific, but like percentage-based approach that like makes sense. If you're going to brine something or like kind of lightly cure something or anything like that, like 1% of salt to like the weight of the product.
Oh, interesting.
That's kind of the math you would do on it to do that. And then if you're actually like curing something overnight, you're looking at like 2 to 4% to cure like something. If you're like making homemade lox or smoked salmon at home or cured salmon at home, that's kind of your other approach on it. So I always think like that 1% range is what you kind of want to stay in when you're seasoning your food and going that way.
Okay, you got any other tips? I need as many as you can feed me in like 5 minutes.
Make sure your pan's always hot before you start cooking anything. Don't just throw it in there. Get that sear. That's where all your flavor comes from. And then for me, I'm like, I think at home for me, it's like always having like a good cooking oil, a good finishing oil, and then butter that's tempered is kind of all the things that I always have on my counter ready to go.
What is good cooking oil?
So like for me, I'm going to use something that like has like a higher smoke point to actually cook with. So like getting a canola or like a canola blend that works really well. Even avocado oil has a pretty good smoke point on it too, a little bit healthier.
And what are people usually doing at home?
I think people kind of mix it up. Like some people will be like, oh, I'm going to cook with olive oil. And it's like not very good smoke points. You can't get your pan hot enough to throw something in, but like a really good olive oil, like extra virgin that's like that for the end to finish with, amazing. Or like a cold pressed canola oil to finish your food with, like putting a little bit of oil over your steak. It's like binding that fat with it or anything like that when you finish. I find it's a really nice approach.
Oh, tempered butter. What does that even mean?
So for me, I never have butter in I always have like half a block of butter, like on the cabinet or covered up on the shelf.
Just so not in the fridge?
Yeah. Just so it's ready to go. I'll keep it there. Easy. If you're like baking anything at home or making it that way, you have that tempered butter always available. If you also just want to like throw a knob in something at the end to finish something off, it's always nice having that way that it's just ready to go.
So when do you know to add butter? Or butter can just go with anything?
I think butter can go pretty much in anything, to be honest. It's always a nice like kind of fat, but for me, it's like always that balance of like acid, fat, and having that approach when I'm cooking with anything that's that. So like if you're making even a vinaigrette at home, you're like cutting that like olive oil with a vinegar, but that acid fat combo just works really well for one another. You finish with some fresh lemon on like a fatty piece of fish, like all those pieces, like it cuts through that and adds to a better kind of eating experience. Okay. Yeah.
What are some little dirty secrets in the industry that if you walk into another restaurant, you go, I'm not going to order that, something on the menu? How do we look out for those things?
I think it's interesting now, like for a long time, it was, you couldn't get product all the time. So I think that was like, there's some misconception of the industry of like, it's not available. And so like before it was like never eat fish on like after the weekend, like the first day after the weekend. But now it's like you can fly in seafood 7 days a week or 6 days a week from some suppliers. So it's like knowing that right approach. So I think less on that side for me. I think the one thing that triggers me at a restaurant is like when the menu's like too big, like if it's like 50 items or 60 items, or you go to something that's like 4 pages long, it's like, how often does that get ordered? Is it ready to go? Like, how do you know? Well, that's my red flag of a place ever.
How do you pair the menu size to the size of the restaurant? Is that kind of the best theory? For
sure. And like, if you walk into a place that's 25 seats and the menu's 4 pages, I don't know.
There's some red flags.
I don't know what kind of magic they're doing there, but it might be the best place you ever ate, or it might be the worst place you ever ate. You never know.
So would menu construction on something like that, is they're using the same ingredients in 5 to 8?
100%. Yeah. I think when you're building larger menus and working at like bigger places, it's like being smart with how you design a menu. So it's like, you might go to a place and you might read, for example, if you go somewhere and it's like chili mayo and then it says chipotle mayo and then it says this, like maybe it's the same mayo on those 4 things. A consumer would probably not recognize that right away. But as like an execution point, it's like that's now 1 sauce instead of 4 sauces for someone to prep at a restaurant. So being smart with that engineering point, and like when you're building a menu, I think that's one that's cognizant. A lot of people are getting a lot more keen on it because that's how you are profitable in a restaurant. You're not throwing things out and you're being able to use really fresh product all the time and go in that direction.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe profitability at a restaurant. How do you break down, the finances on a restaurant and especially on the menu component? Like we got inflation on everything right now. How difficult is that to manage?
I think it's one that like I think more consumers are slowly starting to understand, but it's also one that like there's a lot of things to break down that people just don't think about. And I was sitting having lunch with a friend the other day, and they're just talking to me about like having a burger at a restaurant. And I was like, oh, yeah. He's like, Mike, you sell thousands of burgers. I'm talking, he's trying to educate his kid on like what it's like to go eat out. And I was like, oh, this is like very fascinating of like that piece. But he's like, Mike, the reason why he's telling his son, the reason that they go out is he's like, oh yeah, like I'm buying this burger, but that burger like supports the farmer that raised that cow. It supports that truck driver that brought it over. It supports the person the farmer that grew that lettuce, the baker that made that bun, the server that served your food, the cook that served your food. And you think like how many people's families and livelihoods come into one food item, and you break that down of like the cost of something. Like when you eat a 99-cent cheeseburger at a fast food restaurant, like is everyone being taken care of? And like how's that support piece? So I think when you break things down and go that direction of like having like really good supply chain and really good product available, it gets that expensive point. So you're like, hey, then maybe there is a $20 burger on a menu, but you break that down and you're like, well, that restaurant's in a great location downtown. Their rent accounts for $2 of that burger. And then they're like, oh, our labor cost is X amount, and that accounts for $3 of that burger. And you start breaking all those pieces down of like the actual food costs, the like utilities, all that, and you're like, oh, cool. You very quickly get to that like 5% of like 50 cents to $1 that you're making off that burger. And I think people don't really realize that. And if you send something back at a restaurant, which obviously something's done wrong, send it back every time. You send that back, it takes now like 5 more to 10 more items being sold to just replace that one item that we gave to a guest. So it's like, I think knowing that and like that piece of like the fundamentals of breaking it down it's a lot more expensive and risky than I think a lot of people really take for consideration when they go out and dine.
Yeah, restaurants are like pre-pandemic, they were so difficult to run. And now through the pandemic, I imagine they're even more like transitioning through takeout only, or what's the restaurant industry moving into?
I think like smarter supply chain, being in that world of like what's actually working and how can we get stuff available. Obviously the hyper local thing is great, but it's also what does it make sense for the economy and for yourselves too. And I think all those pieces of components are now becoming more of a question of like, is it available? Or like, we thought it was hyper local, but we actually, the stuff that they need to grow that product isn't hyper local. And so I think breaking all that down and seeing it is just a tough one for consideration of what the future looks like for restaurants. But I think right now it's definitely a debate of like how our restaurants run, how people are looked after, how we consume and what we need to bring in. Like we still have a crazy food waste issue in North America, but it still continues to be more and more and more that we're doing from a food service offering. So being smart with that. And I think just being more cognizant of what our reality looks like going forward. So when you see a menu price go up $2 or $3 for something, it's like, that's a real impact of like, it's more expensive to go eat out, but it's also the fundamental thing of inflation and how things work now. I think the increased knowledge of that going forward and people dining out is definitely going to see more of that of like, yeah, you are paying a premium on your product, but your inflation of you paying 45 cents more for a head of broccoli at the grocery store means that you're paying $3, $4, $5 more for a plate of broccoli at a restaurant. Yeah.
How did you stay away from the dark side of your industry? Like chefs are, I think of Anthony Bourdain, like rock stars, you're partying at night, you have late nights, there's, booze and God knows what else. How do you, I know you decently well. I think you're not into that stuff. I might be speaking out of school here, but how do you just stay away from that side of the business? Because it's easy to get sucked in.
Yeah, I think that it definitely is easy to get into. I think it's a mindset piece, and it's very social. The industry's social in general. Like I'm the first one to go for a drink with some friends after work or with colleagues and have a good time. It's knowing when to say when and being in that position. But it's a growing thing too. Like when you're younger and you're in your early 20s and you go out all the time, it's very easy to be in that lifestyle. But I think too, it's like as you grow and as you progress into what you're doing, it's becomes more about the like industry and like the job than about like that lifestyle piece outside of it. I think like the pandemic definitely shifted that for a lot of people too, of like, you don't need to go out all the time, or this is the approach. Or for me, I just want to go have a nice meal at like a place once a week or once every couple of weeks and seeing that, or go for lunch and chat with some friends and support people that are also doing really cool stuff. And for me being in that, but I think the one thing for me is just not getting jaded and bitter with like the industry. It's very easy to be like upset that you're working a lot or upset that this is a challenge point in your career where you're at. Don't be upset about it. Fix it. If you don't like something, like you don't have to stay working somewhere. Like there's no one's ever said like you have to keep this job forever. There's lots of places and lots of cultures and restaurants that are shifting. And for me, that's super important of like how I treat people and how I talk to people. And if I want to instill that culture in like the restaurant and like in my personal brand and everything as well, then like I got to own that all the time. So like I'm the last one to get upset or yell or anything like that of that stereotypical like old school chef. Like, no, I want to like you have the tools to be successful. Like you don't know what you don't know. And like really embracing people, I think is where I've kind of found my stride over the last number of years. And when I was a younger chef, I thought it was like, yeah, it was okay to like yell in like the restaurant, but it's like, it's not, it's just, it's a better way to communicate. And I think as we have that conversation that the doors open, it's definitely one that's gotten me much further than if I was going the other way.
It's interesting to look at like designs of restaurants too. In the 80s and 90s, the kitchen was hidden away. Yeah. Now, like, your kitchen is front and center. You can't talk to the staff like Gordon Ramsay. How do you manage the people and how have you grown kind of through that?
I think for me, like I've definitely been to open restaurants where it's like not been that case. And like, it's been like, oh, like kind of cringy to watch like the chef like talk to someone. Like I'm not going to go back to a place that I see that happen, first and foremost. But it's the same thing. It's like, did they work in a place that was embracing of them and like be the change you want to see, you know? And so I think that's really the biggest part for me of like where that piece has shifted of like, if I saw that was like, if I got treated poorly working somewhere, like, do I want to like have someone be like, oh, that guy treated me like shit 10 years later? Like, no, I want them to be like, oh, I actually worked that. That's like the best job I've ever had. And so that's really where my fundamental like has gone and shifted. But for me, it's like, it's definitely a lot of work and being in that communicative thing of like asking everyone how they're doing. And like, I think you have to be more open to that communication, even more so then if you're offering that. So for me, it's like every day I'm like, how are you doing? What's going on? Like have an actual genuine connection of like knowing what your team's all about, knowing their families, knowing their like what works, what doesn't work, and having them feel comfortable to come up to you and say like, yeah, I'm just having a really shitty day. And it's like, cool, what's going on? They're like, oh, like this and this and this happened. Cool. Like, what can I do for you? They're like, nothing. I just want you to know. So if I like, am a little bit quiet or like a little bit short, like that's what's going on. And just having that as simple of a conversation of that before you start, but having that rapport that they're willing to come talk to you about it, that makes the world of difference and like how your day functions. And if something's not working or is working, like you can kind of just grow from it. And so I think that's a really cool piece to be.
How do you balance work, life? Is there balance? Like right now, you were just saying, you know, you've been working 16 hours a day. Can you have balance?
You can have balance for sure. Being a business owner like yourself, like, you know, that there's days that are normal and you're like, sweet, like crushed it. I'm good. I'm here for 8 hours. Like a normal person, I go home, but you also know like you're going to get your feet and hands and everything else dirty for a number of things when you open something new and go that direction. So for me, it's like, y'all take it in stride and go that direction. But it's like, the one piece of advice I got probably about 10 years ago in my career is like, if you're going to work more, you better be teaching someone else the tools to do it so that you don't have to do that again. So for me, that's always my thing. I was like, yeah, I'll put all the work in at the beginning, all the work in through like when I need to, or if like there's like a staffing change or anything like that. But it's like, when I do that work, it's like, is that going to prevent it from happening again? And can you change the culture and like people's knowledge base enough that like you can limit that from happening? So it's like, yeah, I'm working all the time right now, but it's like, give people all the tools that they're really successful at the job, make sure that everything is working and functioning and in a good spot. So if someone needs to troubleshoot something, you can have a phone call rather than coming down to the restaurant on your day off and getting all those pieces kind of dialed in. So I mean, I'm always like opening a restaurant, I'm like, yeah, it's like 3 to 6 months of like, be there all the time, dedicate it, make it happen. Then you can kind of step back to a more like realistic schedule. And then if you're opening other things, it's all kind of depends on like what that time commitment looks like, but it's all a balance.
Where do you get inspiration from? What inspires you?
I'm always inspired by people doing like really cool stuff, whether it's in hospitality or in like that. Like I still take a lot from like the art world of what I grew up in, and I follow a ton of artists, and I'm really fascinated by artists in that hustle. Cause it's like, they're almost like the original entrepreneur of like, they're doing something that like you have to convince someone to buy. It's not like you're like doing something that like it's just in demand right away. So I always find like the people that are artists and like creatives in my world and in my network, I like always take a lot of inspiration from them and what they're doing and how they're working through stuff, and that critical thinking of like problem solving and like the relationship of like why they're making what they're making. Because I think that's one thing that we often get into or can pigeonhole ourselves in is like restaurant people and restaurateurs and hospitality is you're doing something that you think's cool, but maybe there's not like a vision behind it. Like what's the pillar of like, why are you actually doing this? And I think when you break it down to that of like, why do you want to do something? So it's like, what's your fundamentals? So that it's like something like myself, like I really want to like instill like a really good culture with where I am and like have that like shift in like hospitality of like, you can be a successful chef and not be a dick. And like, you can coach and harness people and like bring them into like a really positive light. But what does that mean for me? It means that like, when I see something negative happening with someone, it's like, I have to act on that right away, whether it's tougher for me. And it's like, hey, that's going to affect like how much I have to work or how much those sort of things, but it's like nip it in the bud, change it and like be what you want to see out of that. So finding those pillars and things to like base yourself off of and what you're going to do to fundamentally do this, as challenging it can be, if you stick to those and you like know that that's the vision and value, you're going to be way more successful long-term.
So if you had to go back in time, you know, to the start of your career and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
I think I learned a lot with what I was doing, but I probably wouldn't have put up with like some of like the negative experiences as much. I would have just been like, I don't have to deal with this, but you like don't know what you don't know. And it took a long time to realize like the restaurant industry wasn't that. And I'm very fortunate. I have very few of those stories in my background, but I talked to some people that are like, yeah, I just don't even want to work in hospitality anymore because that was like their whole experience. And so it's like those pieces of like advice wise, I'd be like, don't tolerate that if you're in that world. And the other one would be if you can change. So it's like, you don't want to be that way, or you don't want to be in that environment, change, do something different. Like that hopefully is a learning experience for whoever you're working for or working with at the time. And hopefully they can be in that same spot down the road that they're like, yeah, that was a point that I kicked me in the butt and made me be like, yeah, I want to do better.
Celebrity chefs. What are your thoughts? Is what we see on TV completely different than what goes on in reality?
I find the celebrity chef thing quite fascinating. I think anyone like kind of say celebrity chef for like someone who's just in the spotlight now. But I think when you look at like a TV chef, like that's a brand. Like they're selling what they are, and it's a brand, and that's what people want to watch. It's entertaining. You want to watch someone who's really nice in a restaurant on TV, or do you want to watch someone that's like, it's intense and it's like that, like trigger value? Like I can almost guarantee they're probably not like that in their actual restaurant. But then you look at other stuff too, and it's like, I think there's a lot more like celebrity chefs that are like kind of shifting the culture piece. And I look at like someone like Massimo Bottura, who does like some amazing stuff for like food waste and stuff in Italy, and like runs one of the best restaurants in the world, but also is doing that. And he's like a celebrity chef. You see him all over TV. Jose Andres, same thing. And like using that platform for other successful points and looking after the world in general. So I think there's the two sides of the celebrity chef, of like, one's like a very like mainstream commercial piece, and the other one's like, let's use this to like better the industry and better our brands and ourselves too. So I think there's the 2 points of it, but I think both of them are entertaining. Both of them are that. It's just different values that they both add.
There's a chef you could have dinner with. Who would it be?
Oh man, that's so tough.
Or you could have a couple at the dinner.
I think one chef that'd be really fascinating to sit down with is like Sean Brock. I really like what he's doing and kind of the shifts he's had in like the industry and stuff. And some of the chefs too, that is growing from like that typical stereotypical old school chef to like someone that's been very embracive and positive in like culture. Jose Andres, I've always wanted to sit down with. I think like what he does for disaster relief and cooking in general is crazy fascinating. Anthony Bourdain would be very, very fascinating to sit down with as well, and just seeing kind of the background and life story he had. So I think, yeah, those three would be kind of the main ones.
What about what restaurant would you go to? Or maybe top 3?
I think right now, if I think restaurants that I would love to check out, I'd love to go to Ticket in Spain. I've always wanted to go to that spot. Albert Adri, just like so fascinating and clever with like the food he produces, and same thing, just has been able to like really shift the culture of food and over the last couple decades with him and his brother and what they've been able to produce. So I think that'd probably be my like number one to eat at. For me, it's more so like I just like to go to like cities or places and eat and then kind of experiment from there. I love going to like big cities in the States and touring around. Their like food culture and food scenes just like so tight knit, and there's like so saturated. Like I think you could literally eat around New York for like 10 years and not eat everywhere. So it's like places like that where it's such a focal point of a city. I'd love to go more traveling like that, and in Europe as well.
When you go traveling, how do you find a restaurant? Are you using an app, word of mouth, Michelin star?
I usually find a few notable ones, and I'll go there. I'll usually sit at the bar, and then I'll ask the bartender where they like to eat. And that's like the staple every time I go anywhere, whether it's like going to just a cocktail bar somewhere or going out for dinner. It's like go to a place that's like has that great reputation, and like you've been told like go check it out because that's like known for. Then ask them where do they like to eat. And it's always fascinating because usually everything on their list I've never heard of, or like it's like maybe 1 or 2 of like the 10 they say you've heard of. So having that experience and getting the first hand in it, like when I went to Mexico City a number of years ago, literally that was like the hit. They're like, here you go to this place, go to this place. And there was only like, I think we made 2 reservations. The rest were all like recommendations. So I always like that approach. Vegas is always one that's always fascinating for that too. It's like, yeah, there's like the staple in like big hotels of like chefs from all over the world that are doing really cool stuff. But then you go to like a little dive bar or like industry joint outside of the strip, and they tell you like, here's another 3 dozen places that don't involve any of that, but you'll have this great experience, and it's always a win for sure.
Okay, let's turn personal. What's next for you?
I honestly don't know. I'm kind of taking everything in stride right now, day by day. Like I have a lot of passions and fascinations with what I want to do next. I definitely want to keep opening things and seeing these visions grow of like what I want to produce and what I want to do. But for me, it's really just building a community within all the operations that I'm working in, so that's I have the ability to grow and do what I want to do. So when you just have one spot and you're operating it, and there's a few cooks and a few front of house people, it's hard to really have that expansion plan of like how you do it. And I think that's what taught me in like the big chain world of you have to have people to grow. And before you're just like kind of a little bit naive of like, oh, you can just like do another one. Where it's like, no, like building that, even if it's completely different than what you're working on. So for me, I think my biggest piece is just growing people around me and bringing on people into my world that I want to do more with. And I think that's really my big goal at this point.
What does rest look like for you?
Rest changes. Sometimes I'd be like, hey, I'm just going to take a day off and go for dinner, and that would be rest. Now I'm like definitely a little bit more conscious of like the care for myself of like, oh, I'm literally going to sleep today and like make a nice meal and like do a workout and like take the dog for a walk and like not see anyone and like rest of like my voice and like talking is often one that's kind of important now, which I didn't really ever think would be the case. I'm still super social, but I really love that like escape time of like that, or like going to the mountains for a night and just chill and relax. Like I think that's always a good like healthy escape. But for me, rest is definitely just taking the time for yourself, even if it's an hour out of your day to go and have a coffee by yourself or go for a walk or any of those things. I think that's really where I'm kind of gravitating towards these days.
Is there a cookbook you would recommend?
I really like Black Axe Mangle right now.
Okay.
Lee Tarrin, chef from the UK. The book is just like wild, is like an aesthetic point, but some really cool recipes in there. He has like a giant wood burning pizza oven in his restaurant, kind of heavy metal vibe, but like the food's beautiful, really fascinating. And he's kind of collaborated with chefs from all over the place, but he's in England, and yeah, I'd love to check that place out one day, but the book is next level good.
So where can people find you online?
Find me online. I'm at Chef Pigot, chefpigot.com, and you kind of find everything from there and do the tour of everything I'm involved with.
How about your restaurant?
Restaurant Pat and Betty in Victoria Park just opened up. We're open Tuesday to Sunday from 3 p.m.
Okay, book it, people. Thanks, Chef.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Look at that. You made it. Thanks for listening to By the Drip. If you could please subscribe, rate, and give us a comment, that'd mean the world to me. Till next time.